Good evening and welcome to Legal Tech Live, episode 98. My guest tonight is Catherine Rogers of Arbitrator Intelligence, and I'm your host, Nick Rishwain. Now, Catherine, I'm going to give a little background here from your About Us page on Arbitrator Intelligence. You are the founder and CEO. You are a scholar of international arbitration and professional ethics at Penn State Law, with a dual appointment as Professor of Ethics, Regulation, and Rule of Law at Queen Mary, University of London, where you're also the co-director of the Institute for Ethics and Regulation. Your scholarship focuses on the convergence of the public and private international adjudication, the intersection of markets and regulations in guiding professional conduct. And I mean, this is an incredible background. We have had one or two professors on in the past who have started legal technology startups, but give us, that's really impressive high level, but maybe just a little background about you and how you came into this area of study and then into legal technology.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We were delighted to get this invitation and to be able to address your audience and line up after such an illustrious list of people who've interviewed with you previously. So thanks for having us.
Oh, my pleasure.
So we are kind of an unusual, I guess, legal tech startup, and I wouldn't have even called myself a legal tech startup just a year ago. But because this really started out of my research. So as you said, my area of interest is international arbitration. So that's the market we're working in. And the nature of my scholarship is to look at the intersection of markets and regulation. So ethics is how we regulate, but we tend to regulate when the markets fall down. In international arbitration, one of the key features of it is that it's all private and confidential. And another key feature for the lawyers who haven't experienced it is that you get to choose your own international arbitrator. They usually sit a panel of 3. Each side typically chooses one called the party appointed arbitrator, and the 2 party appointed arbitrators, often in combination with their appointing party, choose the 3rd. So, and another thing you need to know about international arbitration, 2 other things. One is these tend to be very, very high stakes disputes. So the average size of the dispute is about $200 million in dispute. A small case is considered $10 million in dispute. And every year, approximately $2 trillion, actually more than $2 trillion in disputes are resolved through international arbitration. So it's the arbitrators who get to decide who keeps and who loses their portion of that $2 trillion. And the other very important aspect of international arbitration is that you can't appeal. So the arbitrators decide definitively who gets.
So this is international binding arbitration.
International binding arbitration, which is very different than domestic. Also because there are a lot more cross-cultural nuances and ambiguities, a lot more discretion for the arbitrators. Okay, so you put all that together, and what you get is choosing the right arbitrator is the single most important strategic decision in the entire case, with the stakes being incredibly high. And so, of course, what you would want to do is research the heck out of your choice for arbitrators, and therein lies the problem. And the problem is that international arbitration, the vast majority of cases, with only a handful of exceptions in some discrete industries, are secret. And so even if your arbitrator is sat in 100 cases previously, maybe you're lucky if you find out about 2 or 3. And the primary way you find out about it is actually word of mouth. So what parties generally want to know is not only who won, claimant or respondent, but also a lot of case management decisions that for example, the federal courts of the United States would be decided by the federal rules of civil procedure, the federal rules of evidence. Those don't apply in international arbitration. And just to give one example of how big the differences can be, in Germany and other civil law countries, France and Brazil, there is no such thing as document production. You don't get any documents. Of course, Americans, we love our document production. Okay, and so do you get all or none or some? It's all the arbitrator's discretion. And so again, you can see the stakes in choosing the right arbitrator just so high. Your case strategy, your outcome, everything depends on it. And if you wanted to find out, well, is this an arbitrator that generally grants the kind of document production I want or I want to avoid. The only way you can find that out is basically word of mouth, telephone research. So the primary technology being used for this super important moment in the case is the telephone, 19th century technology.
Okay. So you wanted to solve that problem.
Exactly.
And who do you call? Who would they normally call in that instance? Attorney calls another attorney who maybe had one of these, and hey, what do you know about the arbitrator?
Exactly.
Okay.
But that itself creates some problems, right? I mean, if you are one of the mega multinational law firms, you're in pretty good shape. I will say not perfect, because again, you need a lot of information to really make a firm decision, and even that's limited. But if you're a smaller, like let's say the leading arbitration boutique in Lima, with some big multinational clients, you just don't have the ability to make those kind of extensive phone calls to your network. So,
right.
and that's important because it really raises questions about the fairness, legitimacy, of the process for choosing arbitrators. And that's how we started, actually, was as a nonprofit and a research project aimed at those problems of lack of transparency, lack of accountability, lack of fairness that we thought, or that I thought, comes out of not of this opacity in the super sensitive moment. So then ta-da, our fix, right, what we came up with is actually in many ways quite a simple solution, but very effective. So we created an anonymous, confidential online questionnaire.
Mm-hmm.
And what you might think of it as a way of coding unknown and awards that remain secret. Okay, under, you might say, like a membrane of confidentiality, so we don't ask the parties' names.
Mm-hmm.
We actually, in an abundance of caution, don't even ask the parties' nationality.
Okay.
But below that kind of veil of confidentiality, we ask all sorts of other details about the case. Names of the arbitrators, obviously, the dates, the amounts, another big issue. I mean, it seems almost funny, but an average investment arbitration, the fees for the lawyers, costs and fees that the parties have to pay are between $8 and $10 million.
Okay.
And in the United States, everybody pays their own fees. In international arbitration, oftentimes the arbitrators will shift fees like they do in England or in other civil law countries. $10 million at the end of the case is non-trivial to know whether you're going to get reimbursed or have to pay the other side if you lose, right?
Yeah, and that really doesn't matter on what size of an operation you are. That's a significant amount of money.
Yeah, so we ask questions about costs and fees, about interest rates, but we also ask some evaluative questions. So, for example, we ask them to evaluate whether they thought the procedures were fair and efficient, promoted fairness and efficiency, whether they thought the questions that the arbitrators ask, which in arbitration they often do, the arbitrators ask during the hearings, did they demonstrate that the arbitrator understood the case well? Did they help clarify issues? And that's a good way of sort of indirectly evaluating some of the arbitrator's skills.
Mm-hmm.
And then what we do is we take all that information we gather through this online questionnaire. We call it the Arbitrator Intelligence Questionnaire, or AIQ.
Mm-hmm.
We take all that data, we analyze it, and just in July, less than 8 weeks ago, I guess, we launched our first reports, our sort of minimum viable product, our prototypes, and we have, I think, about 106 online now that are available. And in one of our sample reports, for example, we have 19 cases that an arbitrator sat in. And the cases, as far as I know and my research has shown, all remain secret. But we can show you very distinctive decision-making patterns by this arbitrator while maintaining the secrecy of those cases. The kinds of decisions you want to know. How often did claimants recover zero? And then we can filter that data by different things like, were the claimants surprised that they recovered zero? Or were they expecting to recover zero?
So I've got a couple of questions. I started to fill out the report to get a feel for it, and you can go ahead and delete that information if you want, because I'm not practicing and I'm not an arbitrator, but I wanted to get a feel for how you were collecting the analytics. When I'm done submitting that information, or if rather than me being a submitting party on that, if I wanted to go and get one of the reports, what is the report what's it look like? Are we talking just a PDF version of a report, or do you have an interactive analytics dashboard for someone?
Yes, great question. So the answer is sort of yes to both. So our first minimum viable product is a PDF, but it's actually a very interactive PDF.
Okay.
Because if you published it kind of in a Word document beginning to end, it'd probably be more than 50 pages, but it'd be really, I think, difficult to work through it. So you can actually navigate through it with a menu that you can navigate by topic. We also can cram kind of lots of small charts into lots of kind of miniaturized charts into a manageable space, but you can enlarge them to look at it. So it's a highly interactive PDF.
Okay.
But we're actually in the process of converting right now to a much more dynamic HTML-based model that will also allow us to include other sources of data. So the data from our AIQ responders will always be the kind of crown jewels, but we're going to be adding other sources such as an arbitrator survey, videotaped interviews of arbitrators.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, other sources that we've been sort of aggregating as well to make it a much more rich, robust, sort of one-stop shopping than other arbitrators.
So that's it leads me to another question, and thank you for those watching over on Facebook and Mauricio here in Zoom. If you have any questions for Catherine, please feel free to ask them in the chats. Catherine, if I'm looking over this way, I'm not ignoring you. I'm looking to see what's going on another screen.
Okay.
So that it leads me to, how do you onboard people to fill out the AIQ to begin with?
That's a great question. So first I'm going to go back to something you said earlier,
okay,
which is arbitrators actually cannot fill it out.
Okay.
Arbitrators have special confidentiality obligations, so they can't really comment, I think, appropriately on cases. Even after they've concluded, they really shouldn't. And so on the safe side, we say the arbitrators don't fill it out. Instead, we ask the parties and their counsel. And so they're the ones who are actually giving it. In terms of onboarding, I mean, that's part of both the challenge and the secret, kind of mechanism we have. We basically, for the first 1,000 cases that we've collected to date, we rely on volunteers.
Okay.
And Mauricio I'm super excited that he's on, because he's a member of our team of ambassadors, Arbitrator Intelligence Ambassadors. And these are kind of junior to mid-level career arbitration specialists like Mauricio, who are sort of ambitious, excited, energetic, and they have helped us, particularly before when we were a nonprofit, to get people to fill out AIQs, to give us the initial data so that we could have a proof of concept, create the first reports. And in fact, we focused on Latin America because one of our commitments in terms of our values is to diversity. So we started in Latin America for a couple of reasons. One, there were really bright, energetic people like Mauricio who were willing to help us. Two, Latin America is one of the 2 regions in the world with the fastest growing case growth in international arbitration.
Okay.
And number 3, there's been this, I would say, accelerated, very exciting professionalization of legal specialists in Latin America, meaning a whole newish, emerging body of very talented arbitrators who are well known throughout the region, but virtually unknown outside Latin America.
Okay.
And so what our reports do is, most of them right now, our initial reports are actually on Latin American arbitrators, which means that if you have a case that involves a Latin American party or is seated in Latin America, you can do meaningful research even if you don't have someone you can get on the phone and call in Latin America.
Right. So here's another question on the arbitrator themselves. How can they get a copy of this report about themselves?
Yeah, so that's another great question. So you're sort of intuiting all the little,
because it's
point of tension, exactly. Well,
I'm looking at is this how's the marketplace play out, and it's sort of a rating system already for these individuals without it being a rating system. I've seen similar things in the judicial analytics
Mhm.
space. So
Exactly.
that's I'm just trying to get a full feel for your
Yeah.
platform.
So we do resist the term ratings agency. We
Sure,
try to avoid
certainly.
that. In part, I think most arbitrators I know sort of turn ghost white when if they hear
Of
us refer
course.
to the TripAdvisor for arbitrators or something. So we resist that. We don't have a star rating system. We tried very hard. We worked to be respectful of the arbitrators when we were creating the AIQ. I mean, in many ways, the whole project's born out of a respect for arbitrators. And so the questions, the vast majority of questions are actually factual,
Okay.
with some evaluative. And when they're evaluative, we're very careful to make sure that we only include in the reports evaluations that we think are, stand up to our quality testing.
Okay.
We do give arbitrators an opportunity to review their reports.
Right.
I'm delighted to say that the vast majority of arbitrators who have reviewed their reports to date, we still have some kind of feedback outstanding, but they generally are quite pleased. In fact, we give them, I think what we will evolve into is not a ratings agency, but more something like a certification mark. So, if you, and something, not unlike some of the ratings agencies where you might put our logo in your signature block saying you're sort of a arbitrator intelligence certified, right?
Right.
There's a report available about you, meaning you're not afraid of feedback. And we think that creates a very positive, virtuous cycle, also for arbitrators, right? So arbitrators, if they know that they're going to get feedback at the end of the case, they sort of keep themselves on their toes. And that's a good thing because we all benefit, including the arbitrators, if they're putting their best in every case.
Right. So in California, my only experience with arbitration was in California. It was binding arbitration. We had to choose our side, and the opposing side had to choose an arbitrator. And the arbitrator, no, this is years and years ago, but the arbitrator, I think, charged a significant sum of money. Is that true? The hourly rate was significant for a long time ago, and I'm certain that the rates have only gone up since then from those that I talked to in the industry. For something high level like international arbitration, where you're saying a small matter would be involving $10 million. Are the arbitrators pretty highly, is this pretty lucrative work for them?
Yes, and yes. As a matter of fact, once I tell you how much they make, your audience and you are all going to want to become international arbitrators. So with the International Chamber of Commerce, the ICC, which has a distinctive compensation regime, it's pro rata, not hourly. Okay. But in a $50 million arbitration, the arbitrators, there's a bit of a range in terms of how much they compensate them, but close to $200,000.
Wow.
For that arbitration. And then I ask my students when I'm teaching this, I say, okay, so, and then 50 million is considered a smallish case, right?
Right.
And I say, well, okay, how many cases do you think an international arbitrator can sit in at any one time?
I'd bet at $200,000 a pop, I'd say probably one or two over a span of probably a 12-month time span.
Okay, that you are right in keeping with what my students always guess, because they also start with the amount they get compensated, and they think, okay, well, that's a reasonable amount of compensation per year. No, the leading arbitrators in the world oftentimes sit in 20 or more cases.
Wow.
Yes, and then the leading ones sit in cases that are larger, right, larger than $50 million. So yes, so the leading are, and some of the concerns in the industry that, for example, again, going back to my experience with ethics and regulation and the kind of the trade-off there is there has been some pushback, right? That if you're an arbitrator and you have 25 or 30 cases, and I'll talk in a minute, we can talk about the market for arbitrators and why some arbitrators end up with 30 cases, right?
Sure.
If you have 30 cases and you have to have hearings in them all, there's only 52 weeks in a year. Right. And if your schedule's that busy and your two co-arbitrators' schedules are that busy, let alone the counsel and the parties, just scheduling hearings can be really difficult. And then, of course, after the hearings, you have to write an award. The awards tend to be in the hundreds of pages. And so
Mm-hmm.
some of the complaints that were being raised about arbitrators, not all, again, but some of them, right, was they're taking on too many cases, which means the cases are taking too long to be heard. Arbitrators are showing up unprepared to the hearings.
Mm.
Arbitrators are taking too long to write awards. And so what the AIQ was designed to do initially was to roughly replicate those phone calls that people make to go ask for
Sure.
an arbitrator, and also to address in a sort of constructive and self-regulatory fashion the concerns, right? So we can create data that shows you how long the cases took to be resolved, how long the award took to be written. We can also show you, for example, so the question I mentioned earlier, we ask a question about the quality of the arbitrator's questions in the hearings.
Sure.
That's a way of getting at, did they show up to the hearings prepared?
Right.
And so it's an indirect way of getting at the level of preparation. So I would say that one of the things that I like about this project a lot is what it does is it brings together through a pretty, in many ways, simple electronic platform, all the different stakeholders. It networks them to get, the parties, the council, the arbitral institutions. We partner with a lot of these institutions who send out emails inviting the parties at the end of each case to complete one of our AIQs.
Mm-hmm.
And institutions benefit because they don't want arbitrators who are not, performing at their best to be appointed in their cases because it reflects badly on the institution.
Sure.
So the institutions are with us, the parties, the council, the arbitrators who review the reports. And I think it creates a sort of virtuous cycle so that everyone's sort of putting in, but also getting out.
Sure. So how do these arbitrators, in my experience, they're often a retired lawyer or practicing lawyer or retired judge. How about an international arbitration? How does that work? How do these folks get to these elite arbitration jobs?
Yeah, so I think it used to be pretty similar in international arbitration, that they tended to be a lot older and have had a whole career of experience.
Mm-hmm.
One of the big transitions we're seeing, I think, in the international arbitration market is we're seeing a broadening and a flattening of the market. So we're seeing that, as we said, Latin America is one of the places with the greatest case growth. The other region in the world with the greatest case growth, Africa. And if you have more and more practitioners and participants from these regions, you want to see more arbitrators from these regions. So there's a big push to expand the pool of arbitrators.
Mm-hmm.
And the experience that's usually needed, you don't necessarily need to have a lifetime of judicial experience, including, for example, international judicial experience. There are a lot fewer than in the United States, let's say. And domestic judges aren't necessarily, depends on the party, but are generally not necessarily their first choice. So what it usually means is experience practicing international arbitration. So a lot of international arbitrators are also serving as counsel.
Okay.
And in fact, the service as both arbitrator and counsel helps you, service as an arbitrator helps you, I think, sell your counsel services.
Right.
In some contexts, in investment arbitration, that rotating door has caused concerns about motivations and some informal favor exchanges, in terms of who's appointed and how, or motivations of, if you're an arbitrator in this case, counsel in another, and I think many of those are legitimate. But one of the things that's really exciting about international arbitration is that it has this very strong, resilient, elaborate almost set of soft knowledge and soft law that comes into play quite a bit in the proceedings. And the way that soft law was built was by these practitioners.
Okay.
And so I think the interchange between practitioner and arbitrator historically has been really important. And that's probably experience in the proceedings, which are so unique compared to any country's domestic proceedings, is really probably the primary credential prerequisite. And then the main credential for being an international arbitrator is past experience as an international arbitrator.
Sure.
So you can already see the conundrum there.
Yes. Yeah. If I can't, how do I break in if I'm not in? Yeah, that's interesting. So what since this is a legal technology show and podcast, what is What is your plan for monetization of these reports?
Oh, so we
Will you
we
be selling this to both
yeah,
parties?
yes. So I think that's very important. We are a resource that would be available to anyone. We're
Okay.
also working on pricing now to make sure that we're part of the solution, not part of the problem, so that we can essentially ensure that we supply reports to the entire market, not just the super elite, big, multi-billion-dollar cases or whatever. But yes, we think it's actually really important that we not be supplying only one side or the other. So we're not a consulting service, like a jury consultant type service that
Right.
only can consult with one side because we have their confidential information.
Okay.
And in terms of selling the reports, we did just launch them, our
Okay.
kind of minimum viable product. We still have kind of a limited inventory.
That's okay.
But
We prefer early stage, so that's you're
okay.
right there.
So, but we're aggressively working to grow our inventory so that we have. I mean, one of the interesting questions is how many international arbitrators are there in the world? And even though that seems like a really, really basic question, it's really hard to answer because so many of them are part-time. They're lawyers most of the year and they sit in a couple cases per year. And it's really hard to get your arms around all of them and understand who they all are because the arbitrations are secret.
Right.
So I think a reasonable estimate is that there's at least 1,500 to 2,000 active arbitrators in the world. It might be higher than that, as 3,000, depending on how you define, the scope. And so right now we have 106, I think, reports on our website. We're aggressively working also to build our data so we can expand our inventory. We're about to start an Africa campaign. So
Nice.
again, we started in Latin America, and in a few weeks we'll be starting our Africa campaign to hopefully get people to complete AIQs in Africa so that we can have data on African arbitrators, so we can build our inventory among African arbitrators as well.
Excellent. And Mauricio has a question. Mauricio, I'm going to get to that in just a second, but how do you roll out? You say your Africa campaign. How do you roll out in Africa? A lot of our previous guests are either North American based or UK based. And are we talking marketing campaign, Facebook marketing campaign, email campaign? How do you do that?
In many ways, Mauricio could answer this question as well as I could, because he came on with our Latin American campaign and was instrumental in helping us that. But so we have these ambassadors, and we have a number of ambassadors. We're just bringing on board a number from Africa. We've already, I'm actually super excited just this week. We have agreements with OHADA, which is a major, incredibly important African arbitral institution, very important for a number of reasons on the continent. And partnering with other, including another Nigerian arbitration institution, we hope several others throughout the continent, as well as there are some fantastic young arbitrator and arbitration specialist groups. So what we do is we recruit ambassadors like Maurizio, and it's a combination of an awareness campaign, talking about our goals of transparency, accountability, diversity, talking about raising awareness about African arbitrators, and collecting data about it. So in some ways, it's less about marketing our reports as it is to get that kind of stakeholder buy-in. That is what drives our engine to create the reports.
Excellent. So Mauricio's question is good, and I'm pretty sure you've been to more than one of these interviews that I've done, Mauricio, because you realize that this is usually a topic. But he says he's probably cheating here, and because you two know each other, he may be a little bit, but that's fine. Cheating is allowed in this show, Mauricio. But he says, can you share your experience with funding your legal tech startup?
Okay. So
the dreaded funding question.
He just hit my Achilles heel, all right? So as a law professor, they say sometimes it's good to go outside your comfort zone. I will say the funding aspects of the startup is like so outside my comfort zone. I don't even remember my zip code, right? It's the really hard part for me. The fun part, I think, is talking to the investors about kind of why we did this, why I think it's going to be successful. I really think this is like a rocket ship, compared to like a used car lot, right? So I really believe in what we're doing. But it is kind of a hard one for me to talk about the funding. On the other hand, we have some amazing funders. And I have to go back to Penn State on this. So
Okay.
Penn State has, like many universities, including Queen Mary, where I also teach, and Bocconi, where I'm currently a visiting professor, where they're trying to promote tech transfers. So innovations by professors. They tend historically to have been the engineering department, the medical school, but having professors who create some innovation to then commercialize it.
Mm-hmm.
And so at Penn State, they've created this entire sort of ecosystem called Invent Penn State. And so to help me get over my anxiety about fundraising, of course, they have all this wonderful training, and I will say they have been truly amazing. James Delatry, James Pietro Paolo, Scott Johnson. We have a number of advisors, supporters. They have a tech accelerator. They have a small a startup, legal tech startup network.
Incubator, or okay.
Yeah, they have an incubator. So they have a number of these different things. We actually participated in the Penn State Tech tournament, and we won $50,000.
Nice.
So that was pretty good. That was our first, I think, of real funding, actually, from some external source. And then they also have a bunch of investors around the university that try to invest in university-generated startups. And so we were actually the first legal tech startup out of the law school. But and that's part of why actually I think we've gotten a little bit of extra of their attention, because they're kind of excited that the law school is getting involved in this.
That's cool.
Yeah, and so we've had a great deal of support and guidance from them, and in a variety of different ways. We wouldn't have made it, to be honest, without Invent Penn State. We have, we were just talking today with some of our investors. Since actually I'm online, I'm going to go ahead and do this outside my comfort zone, but we currently have a convertible note for open. We filled 125,000 of it. I have a pitch tomorrow and Monday, trying to fill the rest of that 500,000. We think that will get us quite a ways into when we start actually generating revenue, which we intend to do. We anticipate doing in the next few months, starting to raise revenue. But that's our current funding situation. And then, there are a number of questions that start getting complicated. Do you go for seed round funding? Do you try and hold out using your revenue so that you can, do your A round? So I think that might be as much as I can say coherently.
That's fine. No, you don't have to go into anything proprietary. It's not that kind of that kind of discussion. In fact, you were more open about it than a lot of guests. So I appreciate that.
Well, let me just say though, if there are any investors online listening, call me about that open convertible note.
There you go. I'm glad you said it. I think that's the first call to action I've had for it. Well, no, I think we've had a couple others where they actually, so you're doing better. You're doing good. So where do you see it? Where do you want to see it in, let's say 6 months? Where would you plan on?
March? Well, first of all, one of the things that's a real challenge for what we're doing is we really are, I know every startup, they tell you to say this or whatever, but I think we really are a disruptive innovation. I think we are not only going to change how people select arbitrators, but we're going to just change the entire market for arbitrators, and in very positive ways that I think are very good for everyone. I've been working on this now for many years, so it's hard to even imagine that, yes, we're getting closer and closer to our goal. I analogize it to, and I can't remember the name of the theorem, where you shoot an arrow at the wall, and it keeps having the distance between the tip of the arrow and the wall, but you can, for infinity, keep having that distance. I feel like we keep getting closer and closer. So 6 months from now, I do think we will be starting to see revenue in the fourth quarter now.
Good.
Our projections, actually, given the incredible need in the marketplace for these reports, and the fact that with all due respect to other people who identified this need, I think we just have something that's really special and irreplicable by others. So I think, and it sounds like a helicopter going by. Sorry, I think it's a loud truck outside.
This is live video. That's what happens.
So I think that by then I think we will have significant revenue that I think will, by March of next year, we will either be pitching for our first seed round, or we'll have enough revenue that we don't need to.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're pretty sleek. I mean, in the sense of low expenditures, we have a pretty modest low burn rate given what we expect to be projected revenue. But I think by then we should be pretty comfortably in, either contemplating the seed round or realizing we don't need it.
And I guess that brings me to one last kind of monetization question. There is, will the arbitrators also be a potential revenue source? They would have to buy their own reports as well.
No, actually,
No.
I mean, and I think that's a really point of important integrity. I mean, there are some, for example, arbitral institutions where they have a list that kind of a preferred arbitrator sort of thing,
Mm-hmm.
and they charge the arbitrators to be on it.
Sure.
I mean, I can understand why they would. It seems like clearly arbitrators would pay to be on it, but I'm not entirely comfortable with that practice, and we will definitely not do that.
Okay.
It would interfere with our, I think, integrity and ability to be neutral and independent.
Excellent. Hello, Mo. Morris Lilienthal's checking in with us tonight. Thanks, Mo. If you have any questions, our guest tonight is Catherine Rogers. She is the CEO and founder of Arbitrator Intelligence. I know you don't do a lot of international arbitration, Mo, but wait till you go back and listen to the replay and hear how much they are making, and call me. We should do this. Catherine, we've been on about 35 minutes here, almost 40 minutes. And what haven't we covered that you wish we would cover? What do people need to know about Arbitrator Intelligence that we have not covered?
So I think in terms of what I'd really love to do is be able to share with you one of our reports, which is when I get, I don't think we'd ever, if you have a hard time kicking me off at that point. But I'll go back to your analogy to judicial analytics and actually legal tech more generally. So, and especially because I said, I think we're just this, kind of game changer. One of the things that's sometimes said is, right, that law is about 10 years behind business in innovation. And international arbitration, I mean, with all due respect to, what are pretty amazing, practice area, is about 10 years behind legal tech, right? And,
Wow.
And mainly because it's truly international,
Mm-hmm.
which means you're talking about people at really different levels of technology and technological sophistication and cultural relationships with technology, right, around the world. Number one. And number two, it's secret, right? So you can't do data analytics if you don't have the data. And so that's the sort of nut that we cracked, or the needle we threaded, pick your metaphor. But until that, right, if you didn't have, or you only had a tiny smidgen of data, you can't do the kind of judicial analytics that have transformed the United States. But just to give you a sense of when I say there are culturally different relationships with, I would say both technology and data and analytics. In France, they criminalized judicial analytics. Okay, criminalized judicial analytics. Now,
an outrage for all of us in legal technology.
Mind-boggling, right? But I think, having talked to judges who've seen their own judicial analytics in the United States, it's not like they look at it and go, "Wow, this is fantastic."
Right.
They're pretty uncomfortable with it from conversations, just anecdotally, the ones that I've had with judges. But they recognize also, because we have such a strong First Amendment and we have a strong sense of the independence of the judiciary, that's just part of their job, is to accept that. That's pretty unusual among judiciaries around the world.
Yeah, there's a transparency thing there, right? And if we have open, and if judges are really concerned, they might behave better on the bench when in an open courtroom sometimes.
Well, I mean, that's the whole point. It's not the truth around the world that you have a right to access the judicial proceedings, or you have a right to access the judicial files. That's very uniquely American.
Right.
So again, I think part of the reason why this, I think, is such a great technological, an opportunity for technological innovation is international arbitration generally is behind even law. I also think, and again, I'm not a legal tech expert, so your audience probably knows more than I do, but I did read about investment in legal tech, which I guess peaked in like 2018 and it did very well also in 2019. And then you see these articles by general counsel who are saying, well, a lot of these tech companies, have this, fancy new toy that they say I should really buy, but I don't think it really solves a problem I need to solve right now. And so one of the concerns is, people come up with these kind of really cool new innovations, but then they have to find a problem for them to solve.
Right.
Instead, we really did, years and years ago through my legal research, identify a profound need in the community. And then incrementally over time, work to understand all the needs of all the stakeholders around that problem and develop a platform that could solve the problem.
Right. And I think there's a benefit there to being in academia and spending so much time on research, is you actually have a lot of empirical data to back up your minimally viable product. So, I think the GCs probably have a different perspective on legal technology than maybe others do. Law firms and certainly users of legal services would have an even different understanding of what is needed. But I think general counsel, they may have different needs, or in-house legal departments have different needs.
And right now, to be honest, I think they're really squeezed. I mean, in-house counsel are regarded as a cost center for the company, whereas the lawyers with big lots of cases are considered profit centers for the law firms, and so, which has been a bit of a disconnect. Now we're even seeing law firms in the current crisis are also trying to keep down their overhead. Right?
Sure.
They also have a cash crunch. Our product is actually a pass-along cost to the clients. And it's priced on a per case basis. So for example, you don't buy a report to research an arbitrator. We're not a subscription service.
Right.
You basically buy the individual report when you're trying to research a particular arbitrator. And that means basically it's part of your cost of funding a case when you have a case.
Right.
And it's also not overhead, so it's not a new subscription the law firm has to buy into, but it's structured as a pass-along cost to the client. So they is in the same way you might buy an expert witness report, or pay for an expert witness to give you an analysis about your case. We are something like an expert for arbitrator analytics.
Yes, and look at that. And a guest has finally brought in my day job into the show. I work in the expert witness realm.
Okay.
Daily, so. But that's so, and I guess I never asked the question direct, but do you have an idea of how much one of these reports would cost?
Oh, yes.
Can you say, are you ready to share that information?
I am indeed. So I will say this is a temporary pricing, introductory pricing model that we've worked with, because I think we're going to be moving to a dynamic pricing model that is driven by an algorithm that takes into account a range of different considerations,
Sure.
To make sure the pricing is, in a sense, very fair, and responsive to client needs.
You mean like one case is $50 million, another one's 900 million. There's probably going to be a difference on the.
Yeah, and also the region of the world. I mean,
sure.
Because to some extent, what we look at is how much do parties usually spend, or law firms usually spend in this kind of research. And so we're trying to be sensitive again to the needs of the market. There are a couple of primary drivers for the pricing. Number one is the amount of data. So, for example, I think in some of our largest reports, we have feedback from 25, 30 different people. On like 20 different cases, because you can sometimes get more than one AIQ per case. That report we're pricing at a much higher price, obviously, than our smallest report. We can give feedback even if we only have one AIQ, which sounds like very little when you think about judicial analytics, but when you think about phone calls, which is what we're essentially replacing, it's a pretty good thing to have. So those, I think, are introductory prices. I would have to look again. I think it's something like $1,500 for the smallest ones. But the key thing is the two biggest factors are, one, the amount of data, and two, membership. So the small report, I think, is like $1,500. The large one with 30 AIQs is closer to $50,000 for the introductory price. But if you sign up to become a member and you agree to give us data, give us feedback at the end of each of your cases, you get a dramatic discount.
Right.
like upwards of
Which
80%
helps
off.
build your engine. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Because what we want actually is for people who are giving us the data to be the people who are buying the reports. It has a number of benefits, including quality control, and a steady stream of influx of data. So what we're really trying to do is, in that sense, we're a two-sided market. We're not just trying to sell reports. We have to get people to become members to give us the data to constantly supply and expand our reports. So the two primary drivers for our pricing are the amount of data in the report and the membership, non-membership.
Okay. Which encourages them to join and provide feedback, because then they get that discount. I like that. That's a good motivator for you to get that feedback. It looks like we got one more from Mauricio. You're probably one of the few legal tech companies that are tackling an international problem, which I would say that seems accurate, Mauricio. It does seem to be jurisdictional mostly. He used to practice arbitration, now retired, and the appointment of arbitrators was a real problem. How have you been able to create a genuine international community around arbitrator intelligence?
So that's a good question. This is someone from the field, huh? So I think, again, that goes to one of our strengths, right? So a couple of our strengths is, one, I spent a lot of time researching and developing the questionnaire and whatnot. But the questionnaire, which is copyrighted, it's a pretty soft form of intellectual property in many respects, is not the real strength. Anyone could write a questionnaire, right? It's the relationships we have. And it's the extensive relationships we have that have helped us get these 1,000 reports. And it's the relationships we've built with different stakeholders who believe that this innovation is needed. And so it really is, if there's a story about our company, it's the merging of, a need that the industry has, technology to help solve that need, and the industry itself coming together to help bridge those two together. And international arbitration is a uniquely tight-knit, as I said, sort of, you can say, super elite community, right? And it's that tight-knit nature that I think makes a project like this possible.
Mm-hmm.
If it was this really kind of, it's when I say tight-knit, I also want to say it's expanding and diversifying, and that's all very good. That, I think, it almost raises the importance of getting more information. Because the networks are a little more spread out, but it is really, and this is what draws me to it personally, to the area of practice and of research. It is a community that's very deeply aware of its own perceived legitimacy. Mm-hmm. Because the only reason people will agree to arbitrate their $500 million, $2 billion dispute is if they have confidence in that process.
You bet.
And I think part of why we've been able to build the way we have is that they recognize this is a bit of their Achilles heel. There's just constant conversation about the need to expand the pool of arbitrators, the need to hold arbitrators accountable, the need to have more information about arbitrators. And they realize that they need to, in a sense, contribute to that process if that's ever going to happen.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, because it really does, right? The arbitrators, the parties are consumers still of that arbitration service. Morris Lilienthal says, great product. The key seems to be getting feedback from both sides to litigation or arbitration in this case. So that's why I like your significant discount to get them to become members. That's anyway, how do people get in touch with you, Catherine, if they want to invest or if they just want to learn more about arbitrator intelligence?
So I'm very easy to find. It's catherine.rogers@arbitratororintelligence.com. You can also find us just going to our website, arbitratororintelligence.com. There's a lot of information there about our reports. I wish I had visuals here to show you. They're really, I sometimes joke that we don't have big data. We don't even have small data. We kind of have tiny data. But the amount of really interesting insights we're able to wring out of that tiny data is pretty amazing. So if you go to our website, you can see both some videos and some still shots of our reports. You can see the reports for sale. You can find my email there. I should also give a shout out. One of our persons on our board of directors, actually we have 3 people. One is me, but the chairman of the board is Alan Crane, former general counsel of Baker Hughes. He's been has experience in legal tech startups and in the international arbitration market generally. Been an amazing guide for us. And the other person on the board you might already know is Nick Reed from Ravel Law. So he was
Oh,
one of
yeah.
the co-founders of Ravel Law. He's now off doing Knowables, which is also a really stunning legal tech startup. And we're actually speaking, I think it's next week even, at the ABA Tech.
The virtual.
Yes,
Yeah.
I forget the name right now, but exactly. So you can find us both there speaking. And when we're doing a duet, it's really fun because he talks about the judicial analytics, and then we talk about, which is big data, and then we talk about, kind of our little version of it. So.
That's great. All right. So that's our guest tonight. Thank you, Mo, for tuning in. Thank you, Mauricio, for tuning in. Catherine Rogers, that's Catherine.Rogers at arbitratororintelligence.com. And you can check out the company at arbitratororintelligence.com. Thank you, Catherine, so much for being a guest. Don't disappear when we stop recording. Thank you to also Chris Cangero and Morris Lilienthal for tuning in. We appreciate it. We'll be back next week with 6 Clicks, 6clicks.io. We are going into compliance and reg tech next week. So check in. Our guests are coming all the way from Australia. Catherine, thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to following your progress.
Thank you for having us.
My pleasure.